Hi, my name is Reagan, and welcome to the Twisted States podcast, where we take a look state by state at some of America's most nefarious killers, elusive cryptids, and bizarre mysteries. Thank you for joining us for episode 17. This week, this time, this month, this episode, we are going to be taking a look at good old Arkansas. Arkansas is a southern U.S. state bordering the Mississippi River. It's known for its abundant park and wilderness areas, with terrain encompassing mountains, caves, rivers, and hot springs. The rugged Ozarks region in its northwest has hiking trails and limestone caves such as Blanchard Springs Caverns. Its capital, Little Rock, hosts the Clinton Presidential Center, housing Bill Clinton's presidential archives. The 25th state, Arkansas was admitted to the Union on June 15th, 1836. Today we're going to be speaking about James Wybern Hall, also known as Red by many of his friends and family. Most of the information that I gathered for this episode was from a book written by Jenny Nesbitt Jones titled The Arkansas Hitchhike Killer. This book's available on Amazon, and it's the most comprehensive source of information you're going to find on this guy. Seriously, it was very informative. There's a lot of just great stuff in there. A lot of information about the victims and things like that. So definitely worth the read if that's your thing. And there'll be a lot more detail in there than what I'm going to give here. So I suggest you check it out. So James Wybern Hall was the fourth born of 10 children to parents Ava Lorena Ingram and Samuel Jerome Hall on January 28th, 1921 in Happy Valley, Arkansas. His mother Ava was a housewife and a stay-at-home mom, and his father James was a farmer and preacher in the Primitive Baptist Church. James was mainly referred to by his nickname Red due to his wavy ginger locks. Often, Red could be found using a tree stump as a makeshift pulpit, mimicking his father delivering sermons to friends and classmates. This seemingly pious nature would not present itself for very long in Red. Red's father Samuel was a very stern and callous man, often delivering stern punishments to his children in the form of merciless beatings. Mother Ava was a quiet and reserved woman, very cowed down by her overbearing husband. Around the age of 12 or 13, Red would suffer a terrible head injury, suspected to have been inflicted upon him by his father while baling hay. Red would take several days to recover and never really seemed to be himself again after that. Many have taken note that this seems to be a running theme with a lot of serial killers. Severe head injuries, specifically frontal lobe injuries. So the following years would be full of rumors of incidents involving Red and his now strange and erratic behavior, from rumors of a horse's throat being slit to Red's possibility of having a hand in his brother George's disappearance in 1936. Now, 1938 was a pivotal year for Red. This was the year he met his wife, and according to him, committed his first 11 murders. Hall met Walsey McKee? Not sure. I think it's McKee, at the Marcus Hill Church. Not a place he frequented often, but he had noticed Walsey coming and going as a regular attendee, and figured it would be worth it to attend just for the chance to make her acquaintance. After a little over a year-long courtship, the two were joined in holy matrimony on July 16, 1939. The honeymoon period was very short-lived. Red promptly went back to his old ways of wandering off for months at a time, sending his wife postcards from time to time. They divorced in 1943 after Red decided he didn't like being tied down. In March of 1944, Red married his second wife, Fayreen Clemens. Fayreen was much less interested in sitting at home alone waiting for Red to return from his jaunts, and much more interested in hitting the road with him. This didn't set well with him, as he was way too accustomed to having his freedom. On Thursday, September 14th of the same year, Faye went missing. The discovery of local barber and bootlegger Carl Hamilton's body on January 17th, 1945, slumped against a tree by a local timber crew member just outside of Camden near the Fairview Cutoff, was a pivotal point in solving a string of murders in and around the area. Due to the coroner's discovery of a .45 caliber bullet wound, with knowledge that many servicemen carry .45 caliber sidearms, the local sheriff's office speculated that the murderer could have been a service member, so they were able to reach out and request assistance from the Arkansas State Police. Quickly after State Police Trooper Captain J. Earl Scroggin heard word of the slaying, he assigned Lieutenant Rhett Oliphant and Sergeant Homer Sims to the case. Hamilton's sister was questioned, giving such details as him leaving his home in Camden around 8:30 p.m. with the possibility of having a large sum of cash on his person, as that was something he commonly did, was carry a lot of cash. But unfortunately, she knew not of his intended destination. Robbery was considered as a motive, but many of his personal effects, such as his watch, ring, and pocket knife, were still on the victim when he was discovered. Due to the war, and unfortunately, Hamilton's race, newspapers gave very little mention of the case. During this era of Jim Crow laws and general Southern bigotry in the mainstream, very little attention was given to a murdered black man by the press. E.C. Adams was cruising along in his Studebaker sedan near the viaduct on the corner of 33rd and Arch Streets in Little Rock, Arkansas, when he noticed a huddled, shivering figure and stopped to offer him a ride. And sadly, his kindness on this frigid early morning would be his undoing. Later that day, around 4:30 p.m., a local country store proprietor and part-time deputy sheriff, Edgar McCullum, spotted Adams' Studebaker on the side of the road, apparently abandoned. After noticing it still there on his return trip through the area on US 167, he stopped to check it out. A poor attempt to hotwire the car had been made, and the interior had been heavily rifled through. The bloody hatchet in the back seat was the most blaring red flag of some kind of issue. Upon further inspection of the area, McCullum noted 2 sets of shoe prints leading into the woods, with only one returning. After following the trail, he discovered the body of Adams face down with blood on his head. The local sheriff's office and state police were notified shortly after this gruesome discovery. Upon questioning Adams' wife, it was learned that he was a skilled mechanic and carpenter with a 2-week-old daughter. Adams was on his way to Camden to start a new job at the Naval Ordnance Plant there and set things up so his family could join him shortly after. Mrs. Adams gave detailed lists of all the items he would have had in his possession on his trip, including 2 alarm clocks, because he was a very heavy sleeper, and a couple of watches. Adams had been shot with a .38 caliber weapon in the back of the head. A week later, 30-year-old Doyle Mulheron failed to show up on time for his deliveries. Doyle was a truck driver for the Western Meat Company. You could set your watch by him on his route between Little Rock and Stuttgart so immediately concerns were raised when he wasn't on time. Upon further investigation, it seems that he made his deliveries as far as Brummett, leaving there around 12:15 p.m. His truck was found on the outskirts of town around 6 p.m., and the next day his body was discovered in a ditch about 25 feet from the highway near the Bayou Meadow Bridge. The coroner would find, once again, a .38 slug in the victim's skull, and ballistics would prove it was from the same weapon that killed Adams. Mulheron's murder proved to be the most profitable for Red, with a cash of $129, and the most damning due to Mulheron being so popular along his route and so punctual. People remembered seeing someone with Doyle along his route, and Red tended to kind of stick out due to his wavy red locks. J.D. Newcomb Jr. picked up Red on his way to an inspection on Thursday, the 8th of March, heading from Little Rock to Clarksville. That afternoon, a Claiborne couple discovered a partially burned 1941 Oldsmobile in a glade about 200 yards from their home. On further inspection, a charred body was discovered inside. Eyewitness accounts quickly started coming in, including an account from a bus driver of a patron flagging down the bus heading back to Little Rock wearing a coat that was ill-fitting and matched the description of Newcomb's coat. Unfortunately, he didn't notice where the rider got off. Once again, robbery was the most apparent motive, and with Newcomb, his white gold Elgin watch with his initials engraved in it was missing. An anonymous tip would come in that an ex-con named Lonnie Blaine loaned his vehicle, which happened to have a .45 caliber revolver in the side pocket, to a taxi driver named James Hall to take care of some business with a bootlegger. When the car was returned, 2 rounds were missing from the .45. Blaine, being worried about being dragged into the case, promptly sold the gun and didn't report this himself because he had a record and was, afraid of getting pulled in as a possible, accessory to murder. When the news reached LRPD Detective Chief Martin, he was flabbergasted. He remembered that Hall had been recently arrested for a barroom brawl and also questioned about his wife's disappearance the previous year. Hall was easily located at his place of employment, only recently returning literally that day, a couple hours before police showed up, as he usually did after long jaunts here and there. Lonnie Blaine gave detectives the name of the man he sold his gun to, and it was quickly retrieved. It took less than 30 minutes to verify it was indeed the weapon used to murder Hamilton. State police went to Red's place of residence and spoke with his landlady after arresting Red. And his landlady, Fanny Rose, informed them that just the night before, she had asked Hall to find new accommodations due to his constant comings and goings. She was concerned he may be some kind of gambler or something. But besides that, she said he was a fine tenant and easy to get along with. Hall's belongings were still in her home. His room was searched. A .32 caliber handgun was located on top of the dresser. A coat meeting the description of Newcomb's coat was hanging in the closet, as well as a watch stuffed into a cushion bearing the initials JDN. Corinne Franklin had in her possession a parcel box from Hall containing a razor, shave mug, needles, and razor blades. Franklin also mentioned there was an electric clock in the parcel. The clock with the cigarette burn belonging to Adams wasn't located, so they returned and searched Hall's room again, this time finding the .38 Smith & Wesson tucked between some shirts. With the mountain of evidence piled against him, state police figured a confession would be pretty smooth to get. During his interview, Red started off thinking they were only there to question him about his missing wife, smugly believing that he was still flying under the radar for his other crimes. After being confronted with the weapon found in his room that was used to end most of his victims' lives, he threw his hands out in a gesture of compliance and said, "Okay, I'll tell you all about it. I killed them all." Red's first confession was of killing his wife Faye by taking her out to the Old River Road and beating her to death with his bare hands the previous September. On Saturday afternoon, the 17th of March, a caravan of lawmen and reporters left City Hall with Red, who gave directions to the place where he had killed Faye. Still dressed in his taxi driver uniform and cabbie's cap, he sat handcuffed to Peterson in the back seat of the lead car. Joe Wurges was who was left. The string of other automobiles paraded to the site off the Old River Road near the Riverside Golf Course. The trip had been delayed for several hours due to a heavy rain. However, the bad weather lifted around 3:15 p.m., and it was decided to carry on with the search. During the ride, as they neared their destination, Wurges asked Hall, "Did your wife suspect anything when you brought her out here?" "I don't suppose she did," Red replied. "Did you feel bad about killing her?" "No, my conscience never bothered me." Also making the journey to the scene of the crime was Captain Scroggin, Sheriff Capel, Prosecuting Attorney Sam Robinson, LRPD Patrolman O.A. Allen, and 2 deputies and detectives, Judd, Sims, Oliphant, and Templeton, representing the press. Besides Joe Wurges were Agnes Watson from Little Rock's evening newspaper, the Arkansas Democrat, and Dick Allen, a correspondent for the Memphis Commercial Appeal. Due to the amount of time and weather, Red struggled to find exactly where he had disposed of his wife's remains. But during the search, a woodcutter named Cecil Foster came to see what was going on and produced the skull he had found about 3 months ago. Wow, and he didn't bother to turn that in. But at least he was willing to hand it over when they came out there. Anyway, eventually, the majority of Fayreen's skeletal remains were located in the area. To bolster the case against Hall and to corroborate his confessions even further, another road trip was made to Alexandria, Louisiana to retrieve some of the items he had stolen from his victims. The accompanying contingent Hall consisted of Oliphant, Sims, Judd, Peterson, and Werges. On the way to Louisiana, they stopped near Fordyce, where Hall reenacted the killing of E.C. Adams. He remembered tearing the man's shoelaces when he looked for money in the shoes. Afterward, he put all of his ill-gotten gains in Adams' suitcase and hitched a ride into Camden. He surprised everyone when he told them that the man who picked him up was a government official, a Perry County Farm Services agent who was on his way to visit relatives in South Arkansas. The cadre of cops and Hall stopped in Camden briefly so he could point out the pool hall where he had left the rifled case. Then the group continued to Alexandria. There he led the officers to a jewelry store where he had sold an unusual ring and Adam's watch. The ring was a heavy piece of jewelry with a snake and Hindu design set with a red stone. The store proprietor, C.W. Ingram, identified Hall as the man who had sold a watch and that ring. He wanted to pawn the articles, Ingram said, but since we're not licensed to operate a pawn shop, we declined. Then he gave me the most pitiful and convincing story I've ever heard. He gave me his name as H.L. Willis of Bunkie, Louisiana, and said he needed money for his buddy who had been arrested for running a red light. I agreed to buy the watch and ring for $25, more than the items were worth, with the understanding he would buy them back Monday morning. But he never returned. Ingram told Alexandria Chief Police George Gray that the watch had been loaned to a customer who was having his own watch repaired. It was to be sent to Little Rock later. The ring was a mystery. It wasn't Adams's. Hall said he had bought the ring in Little Rock, but he had no proof and no one believed him. It had been a long week and everyone was tired, but as the crew headed for home, Hall perked them up with a short statement that astounded them. There were others, he said. Others? Peterson raised an eyebrow. I've killed other people besides Faye and the 4 in Arkansas this year. A dozen come to mind right now. That colored woman in Salina, a man in Texas last December, and 10 Mexicans in Arizona in 1938. There were more. How many are we talking about? Peterson asked. Nearer 24 than 12, Red estimated. Nearer 24 than 12. One for each year of his own life, just like Billy the Kid. The killings he claimed as his own doing amounted to 17, leaving 7 unknown. Possibly more. Though authorities didn't have names for the other victims, they certainly had some good prospects. Red went on. The truth is that if I told you about every person I've killed, people wouldn't believe it. There are so many I can't remember. When detectives returned Hall to the police headquarters, Lieutenant Dubler took more fingerprints. The first batch dwindled fast when officers from other states began making inquiries, hoping to close the books on unsolved murders in their jurisdictions. On Thursday, Red was moved to City Hall, where Oklahoma lawmen questioned him about similar killings in their state. Seminole Police Chief Jake Sims expressed his belief that Hall was the likely killer of Jim Owen, the chief warehouseman for the city's Service Oil Company, murdered on December 23, 1940. He hadn't admitted anything yet, Sims said, but he told us enough about it to convince us that he probably was the one. He said he had been over to Seminole several times, and I remember seeing him there myself. Captain Floyd Parks with the Oklahoma State Highway Patrol Identification Bureau and Ottawa County Sheriff D. Walters called the LRPD and asked for Hall's fingerprints and photograph, saying that 4 murders of a comparable type had been committed in the area around Miami, Oklahoma, in the past few months. Parks and Waters then drove to Little Rock, seeking answers that related particularly to the slaying of Weyman Peacock Jr. the previous autumn. But Hall was mum on the subject. Sheriff Bob Reeves of Franklin, Texas, telegraphed Sheriff Capel asking him to question Hall about the unsolved murder of a man named William Wilcox at Calvert, Texas, on February 1st, 1941. The 30-year-old Wilcox was found beaten to death and robbed in his small grocery store. Reeves said an undetermined amount of money and the victim's watch had been taken. They had no clues about the identity of the assailant. Wilcox lived alone in the back of the store. Capel asked Hall, but Red denied any knowledge of that crime and said he had never been in Calvert. Captain Manuel T. Gonzalez with the Texas Rangers sent a member of his force to question Hall about 6 unsolved slayings that had occurred in around 1938. Hall pleaded ignorance when answering queries by the Rangers. Remembering the report of Hall being seen in a maroon car with a Texas plate, Chief Martin asked him about the back seat full of Bibles. Hall said he had tried to sell them for a publishing company in Dallas, but didn't have much luck, so he quit. He provided his employer's name, and Martin was inclined to believe him. Just in case, though, Martin phoned Dallas Chief Detectives J.W. Fritz and asked him to investigate whether a Bible salesman had been reported missing or killed in Texas in late 1944. Fritz said he would look into it. I might as well set the record straight about Fayreen, too, Hall told the Arkansas authorities. She knew too much. She was the most bullheaded woman I ever saw, always wanted to go with me when I traveled. I let her come along when I went to Oregon. I couldn't take a chance she'd talk, but the night I killed her, she went with me willingly to the riverbank. I always seemed to have a knack for gaining the confidence of anyone. Anything I suggested rarely brought me an argument. I don't know what it is or how to explain it exactly. This knack helped me get rides on highways with motorists who had passed up other hitchhikers. Arkansas investigators asked him about 2 unsolved murders that occurred in Searcy and Pulaski counties in 1944. A skeleton had been found near Leslie, and another was discovered on the 12th Street Pike in Little Rock. Hall denied knowledge of either case and also refuted accusations that he had killed a man near Kerr, Arkansas in 1942. He did tell Capel he had a good prospective victim in Little Rock last year, but decided it best not to kill and rob him. Hall felt sure the crime would have been solved. He identified the man as a cafe operator who always carried between $5,000 and $6,000 in his pockets. What about your own brother George? Sheriff Capel asked. Gilmer? What about him? Red responded. Do you have anything to do with his disappearance? He left home, and I suppose someone murdered him. Despite Hall's devil-may-care attitude toward killing people, Capel said he found Hall to be a pleasant conversationalist. After meeting with the out-of-state lawmen, Red left City Hall, accompanied by Peterson, Judd, Martin, and Wurges. When they got back to the county jail, Hall's father and family friend met them on the sidewalk. Samuel Hall threw his arms around his son. For the first time since the arrest, Red's nerves broke, and he sobbed. Samuel retained his composure. It was the first time they had seen each other since Red's capture. They had a short visit, spent mostly in prayer. Lawmen had, at first, deemed it advisable to suppress the news of other possible slayings until investigations could be made. They reasoned Hall might purposely tell of a long list of bloody murders in order to cause a delay in his trial and also to get special privileges and trips to purported crime scenes, with many stops at restaurants along the way. But word got out, and Detective Chief Martin made a statement to the press. He branded Hall the most unfeeling, heartless, and inhumane killer he'd ever known. In all of his 27 years on the detective force, he'd never met a man like him. He talks about murder as if it was commonplace. Martin did believe he'd committed similar crimes across the nation. He told him he'd hitchhiked over the country since he was 14 and had visited all except a few of the eastern states. He was quoted as saying, "You can't make me believe these slayings he admitted to are his only crimes. We may never be able to connect him to others, but I will always believe he had enough experience in killing that he had about reached the peak of perfection." Joe Wurges arranged for an exclusive jailhouse interview with Hall, and Red greeted the reporter cordially. He started by explaining the emotional scene that had just occurred with his father. "You know, seeing him was more than I could stand. I had to cry. He told me he would stick by me, and I told him all I wanted him to do was pray for me, that I didn't want him to spend 1 red cent on my behalf. I told him I didn't consider it necessary since whatever happens to me will be the will of God." "Have you contacted a lawyer?" Wurges asked. "It takes money to hire a lawyer, and I certainly haven't got any. My grandmother owns a little farm back home, but I would not have her dispose of it for me. After all, my family is not responsible for my troubles, so why should I?" allow them to wreck their own lives for me. One thing Hall wanted Wurgis to stress, and the first thing he wanted the reporter to write down, was a message to the public concerning his sanity. Detective Chief O.N. Martin, copyright Arkansas Democrat Gazette. I don't want people to think I'm crazy, he said. They would reach the conclusion that I'm afraid to die. If I faked insanity now, the general reaction would be that I was looking for a way out. When I'm before the judge, I will tell him that I am not insane. If I have to die for my crimes, I will die with the knowledge that I will meet my maker. I have been saved, and I know God will not turn me down. Why I committed these murders, I don't know. And no one except God has the answer. Hall said he was arranging to have a history of his life published, with half of the royalties going to the ghostwriter and the other half going to a trust fund for his 2-year-old son. Then he proceeded to talk about other murders he had committed. The urge to kill came on me in 1938 while I was working on a ranch in Arizona. My boss was George Shoemaker. I drove a truck for him. Many Mexicans were employed on the ranch, and over a period of about a month, I killed 10 of them. I killed them all to rob them. How did you do it? Wurgis pressed him for details. How did you get away with that many murders? It really was easy, Hall said. I walked them out into the desert, never more than one at a time. I always had the difference, either a club or a pistol, and after I had marched a victim into a remote section of the desert, I'd kill them and rob them. Sometimes I'd beat them to death, and other times I'd shoot them. I never got more than $50 from any of them. Bodies of migrant farm workers were sometimes discovered, but when one was found, no one seemed interested. After all, they figured, it was only a Mexican. Those who went missing created no great deal of excitement. It was assumed they had just left the country. From 1929 through 1937, as many as 400,000 Mexican migrant workers returned to their native land, either because of roundups and deportations by the Federal Bureau of Immigration, or violence from vigilantes angered by the loss of jobs to the group, even though some of the workers were U.S. citizens themselves. I never felt bad about any of my killings, Hall said. I always slept well. He didn't remember the names of any of the 10 Mexican workers, which wasn't surprising, since he couldn't recall the names of his most recent victims in Arkansas when first questioned about those. Did you kill anybody else between 1938 and last September when you killed Fayreen? Wurgis asked. Hall shook his head. No, you see, I married a sweet country girl in 1939 and lived with her until a couple years ago. I was a good boy all that time. I worked steadily, and every dime I earned was gained honestly. When we separated, I went back to my old ways again. Some Oklahoma officers questioned me today, thinking I killed some people in that state, but they're wrong. I admit I pulled some fast ones in Oklahoma, but no killings. Hall didn't elaborate on those crimes, but did tell of playing in a high-stakes poker game in New Orleans where he detected the dealer drawing cards from the bottom of the deck. He said he made a gunplay and took charge of the situation. My next killing after 1938 was in San Marcos, Texas, last December when I beat a man to rob him. I think I got about $80 from him. I still saw him lying motionless 4 hours later. The interview was interrupted frequently when Hall sought to substantiate a point by quoting the Bible. You know, he said, there are some people who can't kill a chicken or a cat. I never was that way. I always could kill anything without compunction, but I never could stand to see anything suffer. How about your murder victims? Wurgis asked. Hall shot back. They never suffered a bit. They or their families might disagree with you on that. Well, for once, Red was at a loss for words. What's your opinion of the police? Red said, I always try to cooperate with them. Many of them are swell fellows, and after all, an officer has a duty to perform just the same as anyone else. The officers who have handled my case have been gentlemen. In fact, every officer I've met since I was arrested has been kind and courteous. They're a swell bunch of fellas. Despite confessing to more than a dozen murders in other states, Hall would never be tried for any of them. It was determined by Pulaski County prosecuting attorney Sam Robinson that the strongest case against Red was for first-degree murder and the death of Fayreen. If the death penalty was not handed down, Hall would have been able to be tried for the other murders. Shortly before heading to court, Hall decided to change his mind and plead not guilty, and also push for an insanity plea as a last-ditch effort. But the courts found him competent, and a jury found him guilty and sentenced him to death for the murder of Fayreen. Officially sentenced on May 14th, 1945, to death by electric chair, with his execution being carried out on January 4th, 1946. So, there you have it. James Wybern Hall, aka Red, the Arkansas hitchhike killer. No good deed goes unpunished. Thank you. Thank you for sticking around. And hopefully next episode won't be as long in coming. Be sure to follow Twisted States and Disruptive Girl on Instagram for regular updates and some behind the scene looks at me, your host, Reagan. And I will be around. I'll be doing some vlogging. I've got some more free time since I cut down my hours at the job that I started, thinking I could balance everything out, knowing better, but still trying to give it a shot anyway. And yeah, I mean, it's heading into spooky season. This is my time of year. This is like, when I really start ramping up as the weather starts to. I'm just waiting for the weather to cool down. I try to convince myself that it's already happening, even though we all know better. I'm still sweating profusely, but in hopes of cooler days, I start preparing for all the fun stuff. I also have a drop coming soon for my Etsy store, Cat Hair Tea. So keep an eye out for that over on my Disruptive Girl Instagram account. And I will see you next time. Till then, take care.